Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alexei, and today I have a special guest, Mr. Russ Russell. Russ Russell is a legendary British producer and mixing engineer who has been working with such great metal bands as Napalm Death, Dimmu Borgir, At the Gates, Amorphis, and many more. In our today's interview with Mr. Russ Russell, we're gonna be talking about his work on the latest album of Napalm Death, which is called Throes of Joy in the Jaws of Defeatism. Also, Mr. Russ Russell has wonderful videos and courses on Nail the Mix, the best online community on recording, mixing, and mastering metal music. So, if you want to learn from Mr. Russ Russell all mix and metal, you can check out his sessions on Nail the Mix. All links above in the info box of this video. It's a huge honor to have you on my YouTube channel today, Mr. Russell. And let's start our interview. How you became a sound engineer?
Well, I guess really it was down to my father. He worked for a German electronics company called Grundig. He was the head of sales. So even when I was a little kid, we always had microphones and speakers and amplifiers and tape machines just in the house. So I used to play with them just like toys, you know? And I used to record like our family get-togethers and Christmas and birthdays and things. I would play music and speak to people. And so, yeah, even at like 8 years old, I was using microphones and tape machines. So it was just natural to me. Like a few years later, when I was playing guitar in a band and we got loaned a 4-track tape machine and nobody knew how to use it. But I was like, yeah, I can figure this out. It's only 2 more tracks than I'm used to. So, that's kind of how it started. And then other bands in the area also had access to this 4-track. It had been paid for by the local arts council, which you don't see anymore, sadly. But yeah, everybody had access to this tape machine and nobody knew how to use it. So I just started doing demos for local bands and it just escalated from there. I became like the go-to guy in our town just because I was the only one who knew how to use them and push the buttons.
How you got into recording, mixing, and mastering metal music?
Well, I started mostly with punk music. Most of the bands in my town at the time were punk bands. I mean, we're talking like, would have been about 83, 84, around that sort of time. And so it was just a natural progression, you know. It seemed that over time, a lot of the punk bands became better musicians and that kind of drew them more into metal because metal, I don't know, I mean, there are exceptions to this, of course, but I think for the most part, metal bands had a little bit more proficiency on their instruments than the punk bands did. I know personally, I was a terrible guitarist. I could only be in a punk band myself. I wasn't good enough to play metal. But yeah, I think that's how it happened. It was just a natural transition as people got better and people got more extreme tastes as well. You know, the punk scene, it wasn't the same as the American punk scene. You know, it was very much more dirty and vicious in the UK. And I think that sort of aggression, that anger in that sort of music naturally translated into metal. So yeah, it was just because there was more metal bands, I got into doing metal.
How you started working with Napalm Death?
Well, that was all down to a really good friend of mine, Rudy Reed, who was my manager at the time. And he took over the management of Napalm Death. And I came back, I'd been on tour, and I came back and I was a bit disillusioned with it all. I didn't really want to do it anymore. it was with more indie bands, and I wanted to do heavier music. I wanted to work with a lot more heavy music. And he said, do you want to get involved with Napalm Death? Because I've just took over their management. So I said, yeah, sure. And I went to meet them. And I think we've talked about this, and we came up with the combined memory of me and Shane. I think the first time we met was at the Falcon in Camden after one of their shows. And we just got on really well, and we were into a lot of the same bands, and we found out that we'd been to a lot of the same gigs, and we must have been stood next to each other. And then they needed somebody to fill in for their live sound, and they said, can you do a couple of shows with us? So I said, yeah, sure. And the first show I think I did with Napalm was in France. It was an all-day hardcore festival somewhere in France in a big sports arena. And yeah, it went really well, and the fans loved it, and people were telling them it sounded great. And so they asked if I would like to go in the studio with them, with my great friend, Mr. Simon Effamy. We did a lot of work with Napalm. We did as a sort of tag team together. And so, yeah, our friendship just sort of grew and grew professionally and personally. And I'm still doing it today.
How were drums recorded for Throes of Joy in the Jaws of Defeatism album by Napalm Death?
Yeah, it was quite an unusual way for us to do it, but we did the drums in different sessions with different kits. We did 3 completely separate recording sessions. We had one session and one kit which was more tuned and better, smaller sizes, I think, like smaller toms, and we used that for the real fast stuff. And then for the more slow mid-pace stuff, we used bigger toms and a slightly different kit setup and some different room mics and things like that. And then we had another setup for the experimental stuff, which was just made out of old beat-up drum kits with metal bins and iron bars and just lots of different kind of industrial vibes going on. So, yeah, that was the 3rd session. And doing that, you do run the risk of it, like maybe the second kit not sounding as good as the first kit did, or I wish we'd done it the other way around or whatever. But sometimes you just got to go for it. Have faith in knowledge and experience, and just go for it. So yeah, 3 separate kits, 3 different mic setups, 3 different lots of outboard and different compression. And it was just the fact that it was done in the same place with the same people was enough to tie it all together, and so that it wasn't too disjointed. But yeah, I really enjoyed doing that. It's quite different to how I would normally work.
What was your approach on mixing drums on Throes of Joy in the Jaws of Defeatism album by Napalm Death?
Well, it's the same sort of thing, really. When it came to mixing, we used a lot of different processing, particularly on the instrumental kind of drums. We absolutely love being crazy and experimental, especially with the sounds, especially with the drum sounds, horrible, nasty metal scraping and industrial vibes. That was the goal that we were aiming for, and I think it worked out pretty well. So yeah, the mix was a little bit more difficult than usual, but I like that. I like to be pushed. I don't like to do the same every time. I especially don't like to mix the same every time. use different things, do different things. The band's different, so treat it differently,
What do you usually use for parallel drums compression?
Well, a lot of the time I've been using the soft tube FET compressor. I like that. It's got a bit of a sort of 1176 kind of vibe about it, but it's different. It's its own thing. And when you crank it up, it really does smash the hell out of the kit, which for a lot of the stuff I do is what we're looking for, really. That kind of overdriven, distorted, kind of in your face. Sometimes it's too much. Sometimes it brings the cymbals out too much. But yeah, what else have I used recently? I don't know. I've had a lot of time off work recently due to illness, unfortunately, but I'm getting back into it now. We've started recording the new Napalm Death album this week. And when it comes to mixing that, I think I'll be using a lot of new approaches, a lot of new techniques, new plugins. But yeah, the FET is probably the most common over recent years. I love that.
What is your approach on cleaning cymbal bleed off the drums?
Yeah, I don't always do it, but it's mostly better if you can tidy it up a bit because, obviously, most of the time when you've got a tom fill, what follows it? A crash. So that crash is going to be in the decay of the toms. Now, sometimes that doesn't matter. A bit of spill is okay. But sometimes, you really hear the cymbal kind of pump through on the decay of the tom. So the best thing you can do is to filter out the cymbal, but leave the kind of mid and low decay of the tom so that you're not cutting it short. Because that can sound a bit unnatural if you gate too hard and too short. It doesn't sound right. But if you use a filter, you can filter out the cymbal from the decay and then crossfade the two together, and you get a beautiful transition, and you don't hear any pumping or cymbal cut off or anything. I wouldn't claim to have invented the technique, but certainly nobody showed me. I worked that out for myself, and I've showed it to a lot of people over the last, 20 years. And most people have gone, oh, wow, that's fucking great. So, yeah, I think I've kind of spread the word of that's how I do it anyway. But I think now there's a lot of the plugins which are kind of are doing that. The Sonox drum, whatever it's called, is quite good for that. And also, what was the other one? Oh, I can't remember now. But yeah, that's the way I do it.
How bass tone was created for Throes of Joy in the Jaws of Defeatism album by Napalm Death?
Yeah. Well, bass is already always a big thing with Napalm Death. We have a name for Shane's bass. We call it the Tractor because it sounds like a big diesel tractor. We've used a lot of different things over time, and even on that record, we used different things on different songs. Once again, went for a slightly clearer sound, I guess, for the fast picking stuff, and then for the slow experimental stuff, again, you can crank on so much more, get more sustain and more feedback. So what did we use? I think we almost always have used Sansamp, and many different versions of Sansamp pedals. But what I usually do with him is I'll record clean DI, obviously, which will have minimal processing on it just to contain any overs. And then we record the output of his Sansamp pedal. We try a few different pedals. We've tried dark glass on some. We've just tried a really interesting thing. The Xeno Drive. There's a new one on me. Shane's just been very kindly given a unit for us to try in the studio. And it is a crazy unit, which is going to feature a lot on the experimental parts of the album, for sure. It's got like crazy filters and different kinds of distortion. Yeah, we tried it out the other day, and it's going to be a lot of fun, I can tell. And what else? Oh, sometimes amps. You know, in the past we have used Ampegs, Trace Elliott, PVs usually feature somewhere in the bass chain. And then, you know, sometimes for the more crazy distortion end of it, we stick it through a guitar amp. You know, we've used ACM 800s for the more like middly, grindy sound. But yeah, Shane has just switched over to Spectre bass after being with Warwick for many years. He just wanted a change. So that's something new that we're using. We haven't used before. But I don't think that was on the last album. I think the last album was still the Warwick. Warwick and mainly Sans amp, yeah.
You have a video on Nail the Mix on taming low end by using sidechaining. So in this case, did you use this trick for taming low end on Throes of Joy in the Jaws of Defeatism album by Napalm Death?
I can't remember if we used that technique. Probably not much, because I don't mind the bass rumble when it comes to Napalm. I think it kind of needs it. It shouldn't be too tidy and, you know, small. You let the bass go for it, because it's a huge feature. You know, he's not just playing the guitar riffs, he's playing a whole different thing, you know, and he deserves to be heard, and the rumble needs to be there. But, you know, I'm sure there was times where I probably would do it just for a little bit of control. But it just means that you can just turn things up a little bit more if you just have that little bit of control on it.
How were guitars recorded for Throes of Joy in the Jaws of Defeatism album by Napalm Death?
Well, that was sadly the last one we did with Mitch on guitar. So we had his Gibson Les Paul Custom, which was fitted with EMGs, into his dual rectifier, the same one that we've used since I started working with them. We've used other amps for overdubs, but for the main rhythms, it's always been the Mesa Boogie dual rec. And they were so wildly different. I mean, we had two of them that were consecutive serial numbers. They came out of the factory on the same day, and they sounded totally different to each other. There was always the golden amp that sounded the best. And with Mitch playing it, of course, a lot of the sound that comes across is because of the way he plays. You know, his technique is crazy. I've never seen anybody have so much gain but be able to control it. Yeah, a master of his art, and sadly missed. Not that he's departed, but he's departed from Napalm. So what else do we have on there? Mic-wise, again, we went for what I do with a lot of records, especially a lot of their records. 57 in the middle on the dust cap, and then a selection of other mics around it. And sometimes 2, 3, 4. There was one horrific time when we had 5 mics on the go, which made me really uncomfortable, but it sounded great. I think on the last album, I think it was just 3 mics. And very, very minimal processing. I think there was a tiny little bit of sparkle from the Avalon EQ. Apart from that, there would have been a little bit of EQ on the returns on the mix, but not a lot, And then it was just about atmosphere. Again, the slower mid-paced tracks and experimental tracks, you can add a whole nother layer of stuff, or multiple layers of stuff. If you listen to some of the tracks in solo, you would be like, wow, I didn't realize that was going on. How much fucking reverb are you using? There's a lot of different flavors going on. But always with the basic core of 4 tracks. He always recorded 4 tracks of rhythm. There was one album where he had a 12-string electric guitar, and he wanted to overdub the 12-string, which I was terrified that it would sound messy. But again, with his precision and his control, it worked really well. And we ended up with 4 tracks of his Gibson and another 2 tracks underneath of the 12-string. And 6 tracks of rhythm is something that I would not suggest to anybody. But for this instance, it worked really well. I couldn't believe it, actually. And fair play to him to push me to do it, because my initial reaction was, no, I'm not doing that. But he said, come on, let's try it. Well, I'll try anything once.
What was your approach on mixing guitars on Throes of Joy in the Jaws of Defeatism album by Napalm Death?
Yeah, same deal, really. Different things, different reverbs, different delays going on the overdub guitars. But there's one thing that I don't think we've ever done. There's never any solos on Napalm Death. Mitch has never been into soloing. Now, there's just some, like what I would call lead melodic parts, but never any actual solos. So again, that kind of gives us more freedom to go crazy with what we've got. With the overdub parts, or with the rhythms even, adding more reverb in, getting that big kind of vibe. We all love the kind of Celtic Frost kind of flavor as well. So yeah. Very little in the way of processing on the main rhythm guitars, but lots of processing on the overdubs. I think that's all I can say, really.
How was vocal recorded for Throes of Joy in the Jaws of Defeatism album by Napalm Death?
Vocals is, again, it's quite different to how I would usually record vocals, but with Barney, he doesn't like to be isolated in a different room. He likes to be in the control room right next to you, which is great for communication and for the vibe. A lot of the times he's spitting all over me, which is... But he's just handheld, SM58. We've tried other ways, and it helps his performance if he's handheld and he can, push and be aggressive into the mic. It does cause a few little issues when you come to mix, but I've done it enough times now. I know how to deal with his voice. We have done some overdubs where we've used a large diaphragm condenser, quite often a U87, for some of the more built up layered kind of Swans-esque kind of, say, melodic parts. Sometimes a different mic is good. But for 99% of everything you hear on that record, it's all just an SM58 going through, it was going through a Neve preamp into 1176 into a Tube Tech, what are they called? CL1B, is it? I'm never any good with numbers. But yeah, I find that compressing twice is better than trying to get it all, especially when you've got such aggressive, dynamic vocals. I find it better to just tame the signal a little bit with one compressor and then a little bit more with your second compressor. That way you don't hear it pumping so much. It sounds more natural, although natural with his voice is probably not the right word. It sounds very unnatural, very beastie.
What was your approach on mixing vocals on Throes of Joy in the Jaws of Defeatism album by Napalm Death?
Okay, well, the main vocals just compressed again on the tracks. Most of the time it's one track. A lot. Sometimes we have double track, but they're usually quite low, quite subtle. And then all vocals go to a subgroup, and there's another compressor on the subgroup. Usually, again, the soft tube FET I like for that, especially because it's got the mix feature, so you can just turn it back and blend it a bit. But also, there's always a touch of distortion on his voice. I mean, there is naturally anyway, but I always add a bit more. Sometimes with the black box distortion, I can't remember who makes that. I find that good on vocals. Sometimes some decapitator, you know, the soft, no, what's it called?
Sound toys.
Sound toys, yes, exactly. That's good for vocals. And then sometimes amplifiers, you know, we've done stuff where we've chucked it through an amplifier and recorded it back in the room. That's good if you want a really fucking horrific vibe. Yeah, and then the more experimental stuff, which is just go crazy, you know, tons of reverb. I still like to use Altiverb. A lot of people ditched it because it's so expensive and you only get one license for it, which is a bit of a rip-off. Sorry. But if they'd like to give me another copy, that would be great. But yeah, I still love that for huge, you know, weird sounding experimental reverbs. And also a new one, Brainworks, is it called Aura? I think it's called Aura. That's just coming into play a lot more lately. You can get some weird stuff out of that. And the Arturia, what's it called? Intensity? Something like that. That's got some weirdness to it, which I like. So yeah, something a bit weird like that for the more experimental tracks. And we love the vibes of like Killing Joke and Swans. So we go a bit more down that avenue for the slower experimental tracks. But for the most part, it's the straight up 58 into distortions and compressors, with very little reverb, sometimes none at all on his main vocals, and sometimes a little bit of slapback, but very, very light, just to create a bit of width. But I do also have on a lot of the tracks the doubler, waves doubler. I like that for a bit of stereo spread, but not so much that you can hear it modulating. Yeah. So I said not much, but it turns out it's quite a lot actually, isn't it?
Do you master your mixes in the same project or separately?
No, separately. Yeah, always separately, because you never know. I mean, one point is, in the old days, my computer couldn't handle it. It didn't have the resources to have a mastering chain on top of a mix. So that's how I got into the habit of mastering separately anyway. But even now, computers have got enough power. I still don't do it. Firstly, because you never know if somebody else might end up mastering it, or somebody else might want an unmastered version. So I keep all that separate. You know, sometimes if you have to go back to a mix during a mastering session, sometimes you think, oh, it'd be much easier if I had it all in the same project. But I don't know. I think it's just what I'm used to. Keep it separate. It also helps me focus, because I'm only focused on the mastering. I'm not focused about the mix anymore. I've kind of gone past that at that point. So I think psychologically it's good for me to keep them separate. Yeah. And plus, I fucking hate mastering. I really do. I've never liked it, but it just turns out I'm all right at it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Russell, for such a wonderful and very knowledgeable interview. Thank you so much for all of your wonderful and very knowledgeable Nails the Mix sessions and videos. And thank you so much for all of your phenomenal and great music work you are doing through the years for audio community, because all of your albums sound amazing and phenomenal. So thank you so much for everything.
Thank you so much for, this is great. This is helping me get back into it after having a few years off with the illness. So it's good to talk about this stuff, get my brain working again. And thank you for everything you do.